Hello and welcome to this installment of Talkin Trim. I'm Jonathon Skinner and today we're looking at the seats for the Triumph TR4 models. So as I'm sure you're aware, the TR4 had 3 different versions of seat designs over the course of its production run. And just to be completely clear, we are talking about TR4s, not TR4As. The TR4As were completely separate in that regard. So purely for the TR4s, like I said, they had 3 different seat designs that ran through the production, and we've laid them out chronologically. So here in biscuit we have the very earliest style, which are identical to the TR3A seats, so we refer to them as TR3A because they are exactly the same. Then you had what we refer to as the early TR4s, which followed on from the 3A version, and they shared the same seat hardware in terms of the frames, foams, etc., but the design subtly changed in terms of, on the TR3A versions, the pleats were horizontal, whereas on the TR4 early versions, they were vertical or front to back, dependent on the cushion and the backrest. But they shared the same framework for the most part. I'll come back to that in a second. And then the late versions, as we refer to them, are very commonly seen versions on the TR4, which were a completely different design. You still had the vertical pleats, but they were quite a bit narrower, but they had this detachable back panel, and you can see the actual seat frame itself is much squarer compared to that one there, and they're actually subtly handed as well, as you can see. But yeah, the key differences being you had this much squarer look, but then you had literally this detachable back panel, which went onto the back here, so that's actually a panel underneath there, whereas this one here is literally framework under there. So that's the major difference there. That was effectively flat metal pressed, whereas this is mostly tubular framework on there, so that's another key indicator. But the reason I've done this video is because sometimes people look at me a bit confused, should we say, when I ask them what seat design they had on their TR4s, and they're never particularly sure. So I figured we've got all 3 versions going through at the same time, so I figured it'd be useful to do a video of them. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the actual seat covers themselves. Please do refer to my other videos on the YouTube channel, including the linked ones at the end of this video, where I will be detailing the actual seat covers and the seat hardware element of things in a lot more detail on an individual basis. But I just wanted to show you the 3 differences and go over them very briefly. So like I say, these 2 versions here, so you got the TR3A, which were first fitted. They were the first TR4s off the production line, almost certainly would have had this design in them. Then they morphed into this design here. Chassis number wise, I don't know off the top of my head when it changed over. You always take chassis number changes with a pinch of salt anyway. This is why we always ask people to actually send us photos of your original stuff. But I'm sure in our archive somewhere, and I hope to be putting it on the website, I will include the chassis number changeover or thereabouts for basic information. But as you can see, the overall shape of them stayed very much the same because they went onto the same framework. So they're still sort of very curvaceous, and they have the element of the semi-bucket seat at the back element, but the main overriding difference being vertical pleats, front to back pleats there versus horizontal. Like I say, the frameworks themselves stayed the same. So they used the same frames, the same paddings, the same tacking strips. They had the cushion springs on the base parts here, as you can see, with the one caveat. Frameworks, you had effectively 2 different versions depending on this base. Now, they are effectively interchangeable, but some of them were completely flat like this on the bottom, whereas other ones had a kind of recessed dish in the bottom of them, which then changed the spring. So obviously flat versions of the spring used flat frameworks and vice versa, but then the recessed element on the spring on the frames there used a spring that had a sort of raised hump section that slots inside there. I think it was to give a bit more extra comfort. Again, pretty inconclusive when that was first introduced. I've seen records showing that some of the very late TR3As or 3B models sometimes use them, so almost certainly there was a crossover into the TR4s as well. But I've certainly seen some TR4s that had the flat frames on them as well, with no dish recess. So yeah, typical production line inconsistencies. But yeah, so effectively they share the exact same hardware with that one caveat that the spring and the frame might have altered dependent on that recessed element of things there, but they're effectively interchangeable. So that's the sort of early style versions of the seats. Now, we refer to these as the TR3A because they are identical to the 3As. Then this one we refer to as TR4 Early, and this one we refer to as TR4 Late. As you can see, the TR4 Late's very dramatic change in design. So as I mentioned, the seat frame itself has a lot of tubular metal framework to it, and then it had this detachable back panel. The pleats were still vertical, but were quite a bit narrower, and you can see the handedness on there. This is a left-hand seat as you're sat facing forward in the car. So like this, effectively, this is the left-hand seat. Now, the actual cushion base cover itself is not handed, but the framework is. But the backrest is where it becomes handed. You can really see that. See how wide that is compared to how narrow that is. That's to allow the hood frame to pass by on the soft top cars. Obviously, they didn't make an allowance for the fact that these were fitted to Surrey top cars as well. They just made everything standardised. But you can see that's the main difference there, and you can see on our seat covers here how narrow that one is, how wide that one is. It's worth noting on these seat covers, and like I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but the seat covers on the TR4 Lates always look a bit warped, is probably the best way of putting it, before they get trimmed. But promise, during the trimming process, that does all pull out, so bear with me. So keep that in mind on that one. But yeah, effectively the backrest cover there is handed, and the back panel here, you can see the sharper angle there versus the more curvy angle there, element of things. So that is the overview, effectively. In terms of the hardware used, these are glued and tacked for the most part, and then they use hog rings on the bottom for the cushion base cover onto the spring, whereas the TR4s, there's obviously a bit of gluing as well. Sorry, the TR4 Lates, there's obviously a bit of gluing as well, but then they started using these two versions of clips. So you had the standardized seat clip, which is that flat sort of version there, and then you had the tubular ones as well, which helped wrap around some of the thicker tube spec of things. We can supply all of them if you need, so do let us know, although it's worth noting that most seat clips can be reused. They normally stand the test of time. But either way, I encourage you to check out the other videos where I'm going to go into more details on these various kits, so do bear that in mind and check those out. But yeah, I think that's it. Like I say, 3 versions of seat covers as TR3A, Early, Late. They can share the same framework. They have completely different framework. It's worth noting, just as a little side note, the framework for the TR4 Late, the actual frame itself is exactly the same as the TR4A, but the foams and the actual seat design are completely different. So you can effectively use the frame from a TR4 in a TR4A and vice versa, but then the hardware in terms of the foams and the seat covers and the way they're trimmed is quite a bit different, so just bear that in mind, but I thought it's worth mentioning. Either way, that's the overview. Hope you found it useful. Please remember to like, subscribe and share with other classic car enthusiasts out there. Of course, if you have an inquiry about your TR4 restoration, please do let me know, ideally via our contact page on our website. I look forward to hearing from you, and please remember to tune in next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.